seemed like they could talk. When they were toddlers, they could say words, but that was it. Most parents would be extremely concerned with this delay in speech, but their mother, a woman named Gloria Gibbons, wasn't too concerned. Her twins had been going through this phase, she decided, and they were just really shy. Plus, her pediatrician had assured her that sometimes twins do have delayed speech, so she just wasn't too concerned about it. She figured they would eventually catch up. The Gibbons were originally from Barbados. They didn't have family in England where they lived, so they didn't have a lot of support, and without a mother there or a sister to try to assure Gloria or to push her to get a second opinion, she just kind of takes the doctor at his word, and she doesn't worry about her twins. After all, she has 3 other children, so she just lets this go. But by the time the girls begin going to school, they still aren't talking, and school doesn't really seem to worry about this delay in speech either. They have the girls start working with a speech pathologist, but it's not a big deal. A lot of kids go to speech. But 2 years go by and there is just no change. As they are finishing up 2nd grade, the school notes that Jennifer has no oral response, but she could write. And June is just completely silent. She won't converse with anybody. And both of these girls are extremely shy. So the next year, these girls get transferred to a different school. They are a military family and they move around a lot, so it's common for military kids to just constantly be transferring around. So the girls are pretty used to this. They've never been in one spot for very long. So the girls start at this new school, and the people that work at this school are extremely alarmed by the girls' lack of speech. Their peers also aren't very accepting. They tease the girls, they bully the girls, and it is at this point that the girls completely stop talking. They don't talk to their parents. They don't talk to their siblings. Well, all but one. They did talk to their youngest sister, Rosie. When their mother pressed them or asked them direct questions, they would give one-word answers. So it wasn't like they couldn't talk. They just wouldn't. They refused to speak to their dad and their 2 older siblings. Their father didn't really understand what was happening. He knew it wasn't normal, but he didn't know how to help. June and Jennifer reportedly never spoke one word to their father. However, when the twins were in their bedroom alone, you could hear them talking. It was muffled and it was really hard to make out, but because they knew their daughters could talk, they just wrote it off as extreme shyness. Sometimes their dad would try to listen to what his daughters were saying behind closed doors, but he could never understand what was being said. It was like they were speaking their own language. As the girls get older, their behavior becomes even more strange. They begin doing everything in unison. Every time one of them stood up, the other one would stand up at the exact same time. Standing up, sitting down, crossing their arms, crossing their legs. Each step they took was all completely in unison. And they don't just walk like this at home. They're doing this at school. They're doing this everywhere they go. The girls begin braiding their hair exactly the same every single day and matching their clothes. And if this wasn't weird enough, they never, ever left each other's sides. Not even to use the bathroom. They were always together. Once, a teacher who was super confused by this behavior decided to follow the girls home. And he said not once did they deviate from this walking pattern. The staff at the school had no idea what to do with the silent twins. The headmaster knew they were strange, but didn't really know if there was anything that could be done about it. They weren't disruptive. They never got into trouble, so they decided to just kind of leave them alone. But they do decide to take the girls out of a regular classroom and put them in special ed. That's kind of the extent of their interventions, until a physician becomes involved. In the fall of 1976, Dr. John Reese goes to the school to administer TB shots to all the students. Out of all the children he saw that day, the silent twins stood out from all the rest because of their strange reaction to the TB shots. When he injected them, neither girl gave any reaction at all. They didn't flinch. They didn't move. Their faces didn't change. They just sat there like zombies. He said that he felt like the girls were in some sort of trance. So, he'd never seen anything like this except when he had done work with extremely traumatized war veterans. So days go by after these TB tests, and Dr. Reese could not stop thinking about these girls, so he goes back to the school and he speaks with the headmaster about the twins. Something was wrong with them, he knew, and he wanted to know exactly what was going on. So he keeps pushing and pushing the school to do something, and finally they do. June and Jennifer were referred to a series of specialists, but because they refused to speak, none of these specialists could really help. They couldn't even make a diagnosis, although most of them thought that it was possible the girls just didn't know how to talk. But if they did know how to talk and they were just refusing to, that's almost scarier. Because if this was just an act, this was like the most committed act these doctors had ever seen. Some of the teachers felt like something very dark was happening with these girls. It felt almost paranormal. It was like June was being mind controlled by her twin sister, Jennifer. One speech therapist later said that she felt like June was dying to talk, to tell her things, but then something would happen. Jennifer would stop June. She would sit there with an expressionless gaze, but she could feel her power. clear June was possessed by her twin. After a few months of seeing doctors but not getting answers, the school decided that now these 14-year-old twins needed to get some serious help. They made the decision to transfer the girls to a special education school called Eastgate, where the girls would have like one-on-one time with teachers. For a year, the teacher tried over and over to get the girls to talk, but nothing worked. Day after day, there was just silence. June and Jennifer wouldn't talk. They even refused to make eye contact with anyone else. They just continued their synchronized movements. The only progress that was made was that they were finally communicating through writing. They would write things down. So the staff at the school had no idea how to go forward with the silent twins. They eventually made the decision that the only hope for June and Jennifer would be to separate them. One teacher said that the girls were dying in each other's arms, and to save one, they must remove the other. Not all of the people at the school felt like this was the right decision or this was even a good plan. Initially, June and Jennifer seemed okay with the idea of being separated from each other. They wrote this letter saying they agreed that they were kind of holding each other back and it may be good to be separated. But then June and Jennifer abruptly changed their mind, and for the first time in years, they talk. In 1978, everyone knew something weird was going on with these girls. They're not speaking outside the privacy of their bedroom. They're not making eye contact with anyone. They had been dragged from doctor to therapist to specialist, but no one knew what to do with the silent twins. Eventually, a decision was made to separate the girls whether they wanted to or not. And the girls were not happy with this decision. So one night, one of their therapists gets a call from a payphone. After a few minutes of silence on the other end, a voice he doesn't recognize begins to speak. He kind of has a hard time understanding what is being said because whoever is talking very fast. But this was what was said. "Good evening, Mr. Thomas. This is the twins. We are really sorry about what happened today. We'd like you to know that if you don't separate us, we will begin talking in 1 week." The therapist could not believe what he was hearing. Was this real? Had one of the Gibbons twins just spoken to him? He was even more shocked to learn that the Gibbons twins had called another teacher that night and asked her to let them stay together. This was the first time the faculty at the school realized these girls could talk. This gave everyone a little hope that maybe, slowly, they would be able to get these twins talking. But the twins didn't keep their promise. They pretended like these calls had never happened, and this really frustrated the staff members. Finally, they decide that one of the twins they're going to have to send away. When they told this to the girls, they were stunned by their reaction. Jennifer turned to June and gave her an enticing glower. Then there was was a scream and a series of unintelligible shouts as Jennifer lunged forward and dug her nails into June's cheek just below her eye, drawing blood. The girls chased after each other, screaming and ripping out chunks of each other's hair. It was so vicious that at first the staff was too stunned to do anything. After a few moments of this savage attack, the staff members jumped into action and separated the girls, and they both instantly went limp. At the end of March 1978, 14-year-old June was sent to St. David's Adolescent Unit, which was a boarding school. Jennifer was kept at Eastgate. June could not even function away from her sister. She was basically just catatonic. She refused to talk. She refused to even move. The staff at St. David's had to pick her up out of bed and move her from room to room and prop up her stiff body against the walls to get her to sit up. June silently cried for hours and hours. The only time she wasn't crying was when they would let her call her sister on the phone. Of course, June's behavior was extremely startling to the staff at St. David's, and it was upsetting to the other students. Even though Jennifer wasn't physically at St. David's, everyone could feel the power that she seemed to have over June. One staff member said June's behavior was like she was on a leash. There was something almost mystic about the relationship, like black magic. She said she felt like June could have been normal. She could have just been this normal, popular young girl if she could be released from her sister's power, but June couldn't break free. After being at St. David's for 2 months, June completely just stopped eating. The staff was preparing to force feed her, but they decided that wouldn't be a good idea, so eventually she was sent back to Eastgate. Once June reunited with Jennifer, the staff at Eastgate felt like they had done everything they could for these girls. They couldn't think of anything else to do, so they released them. They just let these two 16-year-old silent twins go back home to live. And the girls loved this. They hated being institutionalized, and they just wanted to be home. They spent days in their bedrooms playing with their dolls. These dolls were like their best friends, and it seemed like they were playing out their fantasies with their dolls. Their dolls had friends, their dolls had boyfriends, and they would kind of have to agree what happened in the story that they were playing before they played it. But then there was a little bit of a shift in the relationship between the twins in the spring of 1980. It began with these journals. June and Jennifer got 5-year journals from their mom as a gift, and they began writing down all the details of their lives. But for the first time, these girls weren't doing the same thing. They weren't writing down the same thing. They were writing down their own thoughts and feelings. So the girls had always referred to themselves as just Jay. It was like they felt like they were the same person, but in these journals they were beginning to separate themselves themselves from the other and express themselves. And then they began to resent each other. They had no idea how to escape this silent existence that they had kind of just started doing. The resentment soon turned to absolute hatred for each other. Jennifer once wrote in her journal, quote, "Jay can't be my real twin. My real twin was born at the exact same time as me. Has my rising sign, my looks, my waves, my dreams, my ambitions. He or she will have my weaknesses, failures, and opinions. All this makes a twin. No differences. I can't stand differences." By this time, the girls are 17 years old, but they kind of felt chained to each other. They hadn't really connected with anyone else ever. They began to feel jealous of their dolls. They wanted real friends like their dolls. They wanted lovers. They wanted a life outside their bedroom. So the twins decide they need to go out into the world and become two different people. They both wanted boyfriends, but they weren't brave enough to talk to boys. They would sit in their bedrooms and practice talking to boys. But when they got a chance, they would just start laughing. They couldn't actually carry on a conversation with a boy. They just would start giggling. The girls were interested in this boy that they both knew who had also been at Eastgate. He'd been the only person who didn't seem to be bothered by their silence, so they dress up, they put on dresses and wigs, and they get in a cab, and they go to this boy's house. His name was Patrick. And they get there, but they realize that Patrick had moved back to America, but he had 3 brothers, and the girls really start obsessing over Patrick's 3 brothers. So they begin spending time with these 3 brothers, and this is the most excitement these girls have had, like ever. They're drinking with them, they're smoking pot with them, and they find that when they're high or when they're drunk, it's just so much easier for them to speak. They spend a summer with these boys, and they're really loving their new life. But that summer, something happened that made a huge distinction in the girls and really caused one to be different than the other. Jennifer had sex with one of these boys, and now Jennifer, who had been the one who had pushed them to stay exactly the same, was suddenly very different. In June's eyes, Jennifer was prettier, she was more popular, she was more desirable, because she had taken this step to becoming a woman, and she had left her sister behind. For some reason, at this point in their relationship, they begin hating each other. They feel like the other one had always been keeping them back. And just 2 days after losing her virginity, Jennifer attacked June while they were in their bedroom arguing over the volume of a radio. Jennifer grabbed the electric cord and wrapped it around her sister's neck and began strangling her. June screamed for Jennifer to let go, and eventually she did. The girls didn't really know what to do. This altercation had definitely shaken them. They decided to go outside and go for a walk to clear their heads, but while they were outside, they began arguing again, and June pushed her sister off the bridge they were standing on and into the river, and then followed her and grabbed her head and shoved it under the water. So Jennifer's under the water. She's thrashing, trying to get up, and eventually June releases her head, and she grabs her sister and drags her to, like, the bank of this river, and she turns to her and yells, "I love you," and her sister yells, "I love you too," and then they just sat on the side of the river, holding each other and sobbing, neither knowing what to do. Things didn't get better with the twins. In fact, they began spiraling even more out of control. The twins began breaking into homes, breaking into businesses, stealing things. And it was weird because it was kind of like normal teenage rebellion, but after they would do it, they would call the cops and tell on themselves. One night they broke into a tennis court by smashing a window, and they climbed inside, but there wasn't anything to steal, so they set it on fire. Then they just kind of continued this crime spree until they were caught, arrested, and taken to prison to be held. The Silent Twins were now felons. During their first few weeks in prison, they completely revert back to their silence. And then they remember how well June's starvation thing had gone. When she had starved herself, when they had separated them, they had brought the girls back together so soon. They began doing these like alternate hunger strikes where one wouldn't eat for a day and then the next day the other one wouldn't eat. And they were doing this constantly, so both the girls got so skinny they had to be taken to the prison hospital. And the physicians decide that they have to break this destructive cycle these girls were in, so they separate them. But this makes things much worse because they could no longer communicate with each other, so they kept losing track of who was supposed to be not eating on that day, and soon they were just both starving themselves. The eerie thing is this synchronized behavior continued even though the girls were separated and could not communicate. If one was laying down, the other was always laying down. They slept at the same time. They read books at the same time. They had the exact same posture, but they were on opposite ends of the prison. But whenever the girls were allowed to see each other, they would violently attack each other and scream and scratch. The girls continued writing in their journals even behind bars. In one entry, June wrote, "A deadly day is getting closer each minute, coming to a point of imminent death, like hands creeping out against the night sky. I say to myself, how can I get rid of my own shadow? Without my shadow, would I die? Without my shadow, would I gain life?" After 7 months, the girls end up going to court for their crimes, and in May of 1982, they are convicted of 16 counts of burglary, theft, and arson. A state psychologist was brought in to evaluate the now 19-year-old twins, but they refused to speak to him. But this didn't stop him from making a diagnosis. He diagnosed the twins with psychopathic personality disorder. He recommended that they be detained in a psychiatric hospital, and it was recommended that they stay at this hospital for the criminally insane. The girls continue to a spiral after they are admitted to this hospital. June attempts suicide. Jennifer attacks a nurse. Both girls were pumped full of antipsychotic medication. Soon, the starvation pack was back in full force, along with the silence and the refusal to make eye contact. When the girls were together, they seemed to want to kill each other, but when they were apart, they wanted to die. For years, doctor after doctor tried to crack the twins. They wanted to understand them, but no one knew why they had fell silent in the first place. Soon, experts began to believe that the twins suffered from a very severe case of identity blending. See, it's important for parents of twins to encourage their twins to be individuals apart from each other. It's easy to treat twins as a one person instead of two. June and Jennifer's mother didn't see any harm in her daughters dressing the same. She referred to them as the twinnies instead of by their names, and at some point, June and Jennifer just kind of merged into one person, who was referred to as Jay. Many people who worked with the twins felt like Jennifer was the enforcer of this silent game. Everyone concluded that June was kind of the good twin, the one who would have been able to lead a normal life. It was believed that there were issues that were heightened by the fact that the family was often the only black family in the area they lived. And remember, they were constantly moving. After being institutionalized for 12 years, the twins were able to be released. A few weeks before they were supposed to get out, the twins have this major shift in their attitudes. They had made a pact, deciding that once they were released, one of them was going to die. The 29-year-old twins were released on March 9th, 1993. The night before, Jennifer hadn't been feeling well. They climbed into a van that was going to drive them away from the psychiatric ward, and a tired Jennifer laid her head on her sister's shoulder and fell asleep. But when the van stopped and it was time for the girls to get out, Jennifer wouldn't wake up. An ambulance was called and they rushed her to the hospital, but Jennifer Gibbons was declared dead. The silent twins had fulfilled their pact. There was no evidence that June had murdered her sister, although there has been a lot of speculation